Okay, picking up where we left off in the last village. Lots of casualties going in for the Allies. The first wave of Allies were going to take heavy losses. But once they got into Europe, once that initial wave that took heavy losses broke them through and into France, they were going to be able to move very, very quickly towards Germany itself. So they move first inward towards Paris. By September, they had liberated France from German control, as well as Belgium, Luxembourg, and at that point, they are on their way towards Germany and specifically towards the capital of Berlin, where Hitler is located. So a lot of sacrifices made on D-Day for the cause, and like I said, if you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan, the opening scene is a brutally accurate depiction of what happened that day. But moving forward, the Allies are now very quickly moving through France toward Germany. Hitler at this point realizes that his days are probably numbered, and he's going to make one last-ditch effort to win this war. And he's basically caught between two forces driving towards him. The United States and the British, of course, as well, are advancing through France from the west towards Berlin. Meanwhile, the Soviets are advancing from the east towards Berlin, and they're essentially going to meet in the middle and trap Hitler in between them. Hitler decides to counterattack in the west against the Americans. And what he does, he pushes into the supply lines, and he does catch them off guard a little bit. He's going to hopefully try to hurt their supply lines, cut off communication between the Americans and the British and their ability to interact, and hopefully disrupt them in that way. And when he breaks through the line, it forms, and you can kind of see it in the picture over here. It sort of bulges into the American line, and that's why this becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. And the goal, again, was to disrupt the Allied supply lines, which he does, but only briefly. The Allies are caught off guard, but they do eventually regroup, and they're able to push the Germans back. So Hitler's last-ditch attempt to win this war throws the Allies off guard for a moment, but essentially fails. After the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler clearly realizes he's a goner at this point. By March of 1945, the Allies are rolling past the Rhine River. They're into Germany. They're moving towards Berlin with 3 million soldiers. Hitler marries his longtime mistress, Eva Braun, and they sort of prepare for the end. They marry, and then on the next day, in an underground bunker, they commit suicide together. There's different stories about how they did it. They're pretty sure Hitler shot himself. Supposedly, he gave her some poison. Ultimately, though, he has both of their bodies burned so that the Allies will never actually get their hands on him and really can't even confirm that he's dead. There were rumors for years that he had escaped to South America, which some Nazi leaders did. But Hitler, in reality, died in that underground bunker. And even if he had escaped, he'd certainly be dead by today. But Hitler and his mistress, wife, as of the day before, do die in that underground bunker there. And that's pretty much the end of Nazi Germany. Hitler's second in command basically gives orders to surrender and then kills himself and his entire family as well. Joseph Goebbels, we mentioned him last class when we were talking about the Holocaust. But here's sort of the chain of events. On May 7, 1945, Eisenhower accepts an unconditional surrender from Germany. Unconditional meaning basically exactly what it says. There were no conditions set. Germany basically says, whatever the circumstances, we can't go on here. We are quitting. You win. Now, this is a little bittersweet for the Americans in the sense that FDR, Roosevelt, had seen us through the Depression. He had seen us through essentially the entirety of World War II. And he had died on April 12th, less than a month before the war in Europe comes to an end. His vice president, Harry Truman, then takes over. And on May 9th, Truman, who's now president of the United States, receives the official signed document of surrender. And May 9th is hailed as VE Day, standing for Victory in Europe Day. So the war in Europe at that point is over. But World War II itself is not over because we still have a war going on in the Pacific. At that point, it's the Allies, and mainly we're talking about the Americans there, versus the Japanese in the Pacific. If you'll remember back to last time, however, the Allies did have the Japanese on the run a little bit, moving back towards Japan with our island hopping campaign. A big Allied victory at Guadalcanal, and the Japanese, who had been advancing southward in the Pacific, had been stopped. And the Allies are now moving in on Japan with the island hopping campaign. And the Allied forces land on the island of Leyte in the Philippines, which they'd been booted out of, remember, way back with the Bataan Death March and all that circumstance. The Japanese had come up with sort of a last-ditch plan to halt Allied advancement. They were going to try to destroy their naval fleet out there. So at the Battle of Lake Gulf, they pull out all the stops. That's where the Japanese are using all sorts of attacks, including their kamikaze pilots, which again are suicide bombs, literally just a guy in a plane flying that plane loaded full of fuel and explosive straight into someone's ship. And of course that can be effective, but you do lose some people in the process as well. And for the Japanese in this case, it was not effective enough. The Japanese Navy was crushed. All they had left were the remaining kamikaze pilots willing to fly and their land army, but their navy is essentially crushed at this point. By the spring of 1945, the Allies had taken two important islands, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Those battles are often talked about together. Now, they lose a lot of people in the process of these battles. The Americans lose 12,000. The Japanese lose 100,000 people in these battles. And Iwo Jima is where that photograph from the first page was taken. And just for your amusement, there in the bottom right-hand corner is that photograph reenacted with Lego figures, which is pretty cool. But one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. So here's what Truman, the American president, faces at this point. He's got a situation where he realizes almost for sure that he's going to win. But the Japanese mentality is basically to never give up. It basically almost goes back to that samurai culture, that never quit mentality. It's better to sort of die honorably than to give up. So Truman has a new weapon at his disposal. The United States had developed the atomic bomb through what was called the Manhattan Project. And this dated back actually to when we were trying to defeat Germany still, because Germany was trying to develop this as well. Fortunately for us, people like Albert Einstein defected, and we ended up creating the bomb first, and Germany never got it, and we never had to use it in that part of the war. But we do have that at our disposal now. And the atomic bomb is a weapon like the world has never seen before. It can basically take a large chunk of a city, if not a whole city, and just wipe it off the map in a single instant. And then, of course, there's the radiation, the fallout, and the possibility of cancer for years after and all those problems as well. Some of those things weren't understood at the time, but Truman realizes he has this weapon, and he realizes that he has a decision to make. He can continue to fight the conventional way and will probably eventually win, but a lot of American soldiers will die in the process. Or he can use this weapon, lose no more American lives in the process, but on the other hand, he takes many Japanese lives, and not Japanese soldiers. We're talking about innocent people in their homes, dying horrific deaths here. There's a lot of debate about what was or was not the right thing to do here, and we can talk about that when I get back. It's an interesting debate to have. Let's focus on the factual part of it for the moment, though. In New Mexico, in July of 45, they do a test bomb, and it works. Way out in the desert, they do this. There were rumblings felt for miles. I actually have an interesting story to read to you guys about that later on out of a book that I have. But Truman finally authorizes them to go ahead and drop these bombs on Japan, and they gave Japan a warning. They said, we have this unbelievable new weapon. We're going to give you the option to surrender. They don't surrender. On August 6, 1945, they drop the first bomb on the city of Hiroshima. Around 75,000 people die essentially instantly. Many countries might have surrendered at this point, but Japan does not. So we give them another warning. We're going to drop another one. And we do that. In fact, 3 days later on the city of Nagasaki, a further 70,000 people die. That is on August 9th of 1945, which is incidentally also my birthday and the day that another bomb will be dropped on the city of Louisville coming up this year. Uh-oh. But obviously this is a very serious matter. Bomb dropped on Nagasaki. And at this point, a couple of days later, the Japanese do ultimately surrender on September 2nd, 1945. And that essentially brings World War II to an end. The interesting story about the end of this was that actually we had told the Japanese that we were going to drop a third bomb on their capital of Tokyo, which would have been horrific, obviously, for them. The secret is that we didn't actually have a third bomb ready, and it would have taken a while to get it ready. They didn't know that, though. We essentially called their bluff, and fortunately for the American side, they did end up surrendering here, and there were no further lives lost in what was obviously a very, very terrible situation. All right, ladies, I hope this was helpful. You guys are going to work on an ABCs of World War II activity now. That'll get you looking back through your notes a little bit, sort of a good mid-unit review of your notes, hopefully, so we can start preparing for the World War II test coming up in a couple of weeks, probably. Your sub should be handing that out shortly. In the meantime, why don't you guys get work going on that and have a fantastic weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Deuces.